conservation seems like the main focus, right? With the current water situation that we have, it's not necessarily how do we create new sources. It's conserving sources, right? Am I right to kind of assume that?
Yeah, there's no more water out there. Like that whole scenario of, hey, we can just go and tap into a new source, that's gone away, 50 plus years ago. So the question now is, what can we do with the water that we have, and how do we want to change that? And so we've been able to go a long ways with changing it. And so a lot of times, like for example, they used to do a lot of flood irrigating. It worked really well.
Still do in some places.
They still do. But if you pipe it and pressurize it, there's a huge water savings there. And so when you get that savings, then you have a little bit more water to do unique things with. And so a lot of those easy water conservation projects that they've done for the last 40 years are starting to come to the end.
Yeah.
And then, and there's a lot of discussion about this, and I don't get into the politics of this, but it is definitely hotter and drier today than it was. The last 20 years have been hotter and drier than it was the previous 100 years.
Yeah.
So just the hydraulics and hydrology is not producing as much water as it did, let's say, in the 80s or even in the 90s. And so there's just a lot of change going on, and of course that creates a lot of stress on the system.
Yeah.
And then of course we have a booming population, and that's a good thing. But that just adds a whole new dynamics. And so we have to figure out ways to balance all that.
Somebody told me, and I won't state like the who said it, but they said that there's a massive aquifer underneath Pine Mountain.
Yeah.
Is that true?
So yes and no. And why I say yes and no. As an engineer, I can come in and I go in there and say, okay, the moisture soil content of underneath Pine Valley is 10%. And then you do the geographical area and it comes back with this astronomical large number.
Amount of water, yeah.
The problem is you can't get that water out of that. And so when you drill in to like a well and certain things like that, you're going into water that's completely saturated with water, and you can pump that out. And we do. So just so you know, we have springs, we have wells, we have all that around Pine Valley Mountain, and we are sucking water out of that aquifer. But to get water to that last little bit is astronomically difficult and astronomically expensive.
It'd be like, I guess maybe analogy that just popped in my head. It'd be like, you take a sponge and you run it underwater and you squeeze the sponge and a bunch of water comes out. But then when you take the sponge and you've tried to squeeze it all out, you know that the sponge is still wet.
Yes.
But you can't squeeze any more out of, even though you know there's water there. And then you multiply that by a massive sponge, you still can't get any more of that water, even though there is some kind of content in there. Is that kind of an...
That's 100%. In fact, so that's what we usually talk to people about. And you're exactly right. So you're like, yeah, this sponge is wet. Now imagine having the size of Pine Valley Mountain of those sponges. There's an astronomical amount of water in there, but you can't squeeze that sponge any harder.
Yeah, right.
So that's what we actually say. Yeah, there's water there, but you can't get it out of it.
Yeah.
Or you could, and it's so astronomically expensive to try to figure out certain things like that. And so where our wells are at and everything like that is in that aquifer that's saturated that we can't actually pump out of. A lot of times people talk about what's called primary water or deep water and stuff like that. So we have had very, very deep wells drilled in this area, and there is some evidence along certain major fault lines that there is water there. And where we get that information is we drill down. Well, they were looking for oil, and they drilled down sometimes like miles deep. The problem is when you get down deep and you do find water there, traditionally it has a lot of TDS, total dissolved solids, to the point you can't drink it.
Okay.
You couldn't put on crops, you couldn't do anything with it, and so pumping water from 2 miles underneath the ground up is very, very expensive. And then you get this water on top, and then you have to figure out how to treat it. So you have to send it through reverse osmosis. And then you have what's called a brine stream that you have to deal with that has usually not good chemicals you want to deal with. And so there is some options there, but so a typical water bill right now in Washington County is about $40 a month. To get to that level, we'd be talking about water bills in the tune of like $1,000 a month.
Wow.
And so there's always that economics that we always look into what we are doing, and can that be affordable? And so, sorry if I'm going down to
no, this is good.
things. So we get accused a lot of having really cheap water. So a $40 water rate for a typical citizen is actually some of the lowest in the United States.
Okay.
Most people are paying more like around $100 to $150.
Okay.
So I'm actually very happy that I'm very happy, and I do everything I can to make our water as cheap as possible here, because I know we have a lot of people on fixed incomes. We have a lot of senior citizens here that only get their Social Security check. And so I try to keep that first allotment of water as cheap as possible. And if we start doing some of this stuff, the average water bill would just go astronomically high.
Yeah, there's just not there's no in between. It's either you have easy water that easily flows to everybody, or it's really expensive to just make that water worth being potable, which goes back to like a reuse thing. But so you guys put out this 20-year plan, July 2023. I hadn't seen any other 20-year plans. Like I kind of looked back in time. Is this the first one that they've done like a specific 20-year plan, or is this just titled this way and you kind of have always had something like that?
So we've always planned in the future, and we're always looking in the future to see what is going to happen, of course. And we really want to be 20 years out, because it takes years to build a project. So like the Tokerville Reservoir, the district decided that as a district project in 1993. And we're just starting to barely build that. And so some
of that stuff drives me nuts.
Oh, well,
this specific conversation, well, it's like the Lake Powell pipeline. It's been 25 years from idea, and we're still might be another 10 to 20 if ever, right? It's, some of these ideas where we work on these projects in so many time, money, resources, and, anyway, it's very frustrating. I can only imagine how it feels to you.
I have to be careful, because this is one of my other soapbox I could go off on. It has nothing to do with the environment, by the way.
Yeah, well, I think you should get on your soapbox, sir. I think this is a great place to get on the soapbox.
So with the dynamics of everything with the Colorado River and the politics that are going on at a federal level, we realized we were not going to get the Lake Powell pipeline in the time we needed to for our water sources. And so that was it's not acceptable. We can't run out of water, but yet we are looking at running out of water. And so what we did as a team is we got together and I basically said, okay, anything that anybody has thought about, I want to know about. Like the crazier the idea, let's bring it out on the table. And so we just started talking about old projects that people maybe had ideas on or thoughts on. And we put them out and we pull them off the shelf and we look at them and we evaluate them and see if they were economically feasible. So there are some ideas out there that, we could get some water here, but then you're paying astronomically high water bills. And we were going for a goal of 20 years too. That was kind of our target. And the reason why 20 years is we reached out to like bond attorneys or people that sell bonds, municipal bonds or bonds for corporations and stuff like that. We talked to commercial realtors, the home builders, and we says, what timeline do you need for us to have a detailed plan showing we have water so you guys are comfortable? And 20 years. That's what they want. They want to make sure that a community has water for 20 years. And so we set 20 years as our target, and then we just started pulling ideas off the shelves, and we kind of outlined them. And we says, okay, if we do all these projects, if we do all this stuff, this is how we can make sure that we have water for 20 years. And so you can see that we're looking at 5 specific areas. And if we do all this, we can show that we can afford this. It's by collecting like impact fees and everything like that. These are all projects that we know are engineeringly feasible, that we can do. Like it's fairly easy from an engineering standpoint to get done. And so we wanted to create this document so we're very transparent with what we do, what we're looking at, and what we plan to do. And so that's where we came up with the 20-year plan. It is a sense, it's interesting. We did this. And the Utah State Legislature came and says, this is great. This is exactly what we want. We want you to expand it a little bit. So we're gonna actually add our next plan that we're working on right now is going to include ag. But now the state of Utah is saying, hey, we want the same exact document for all the counties in the state of Utah. And so there's actually some bills in the state legislature basically going to require other counties to come up with something very similar now. Yeah.
One thing I'll point out, because I'm trying not to go in all these different directions. Go to the next page quick. Okay, it says, a note of caution. The district's ability to execute this plan and to successfully obtain the new water supplies discussed herein is contingent upon all RWSA partners working together. RWSA?
Regional Water Supply Agreement.
Okay, partners working together. Without a unified approach and a holistic view of the water supplies needed to serve the county as a whole, the new supply yields presented in this plan may not be achievable. This plan is a high-level review of potential future water supply alternatives. Additional details analysis will be required to refine the estimates discussed herein. And, every time I've heard you speak, because I've heard you, maybe give 4 or 5 presentations, and I'm always left feeling like, oh man, everything's gonna be great, because you do a great job in presenting it. You have a very positive, upbeat attitude about this. I mean, obviously, that's your job, right? That's your job. But a big part of me, I'm cynical enough to where I'm like, somebody's filling me full of BS. But I've never felt that way. I feel like you've always been really genuine and optimistic about where the water situation is. Yet when I look at data and when I read through some of this, I'm like, this seems really hopeful. Mm-hmm. There's a lot less of a guarantee in a lot of this stuff, and a lot of it is let's pray for water, right? I can't help but think when I left UVU after that water symposium, it's like all this is great, but if it doesn't rain and the drought continues, we're out, and there could be some serious economic consequences that go in that. Do you feel like you err on the side of that optimistic side just as a person, or is this, is there some, is there a little bit of contrived nature to that? Or is there a feeling of like, hey, if I'm not optimistic about this as the water guide, who else is going to be optimistic about this? Or do you feel like the plan that you have set forth is really a feasible plan? Because I think there was a third-party analysis done, I think maybe a couple years ago, and it said we had like 5 years left, and I felt like every time I heard it was like, we have 10 years, then we had 8 years, and then we're actually over our yield, the average yield, so we're kind of out of water right now. Mm-hmm. So maybe help me bridge that gap. We have this 20-year plan that seems hopeful, but also out of the same tone, it's like, we're overusing water already. We've overpromised what we can actually really guarantee and deliver on. Maybe help me kind of understand that. If there was a question in there, yeah. I don't know.
It's a great question, and a question that comes up a lot. And the problem is when we look in the future, there's these variables. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the reasons why we put this note of caution on there is so, yeah, generally I'm very optimistic. I mean, I'm a happy guy, but with water, we have to be pessimistic. And so our plan is assuming that the new homes being constructed today are very, very, very water efficient homes, the most water efficient homes in the state of Utah.